Hi, welcome to Jadekine Gaming. My name is Adam, and today I've basically got the second part of the world-building series. And today we're going over deities, building a pantheon, an array of gods for your world. And of course I want to begin this again, like, even if you're building a world, you do not have to build your own pantheon. You can do a couple of things. You can decide your world is more or less just basically a monotheistic world. There is a god. It covers all of the domains, and it is more or less separate, keeps itself separate from the world, and there could be, there's clerics, there's temples of worship, but you can keep the aspects of the religion just minimal in the campaigns you run. That is perfectly fine. You don't really have, if you don't want your game to focus on religion, or if you have players that, really just aren't comfortable with that as part of the game, with all these made-up gods, fine. If you don't like it, then don't do it. If your players don't like it, try and, make a world where it doesn't force someone into that uncomfortable situation. If you want to play with them and they don't want to play with that, then you can run it that way. No problem. Alternatively, if you don't want to make your own pantheon, but you like that fantasy element of the games, then you can use things that are already made. Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes has several lists of deities, of different pantheons, for the elven gods, the dwarven gods, etc. So you can always just, use that. And if you want, you could say, because I've thought of this, you could say, in my world, there was a war amongst the gods. And the pantheon that won out was the elven pantheon, and now they are the only gods that can grant any power, the only ones left. And say that even though this is an elven pantheon, and like elves have some ownership to it, and it feels very elven, it can be the only pantheon of gods that your world has left from some thing in the past, whatever it may be. So you can use it that way. Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide goes over the more general, it goes over, those same elven pantheons, dwarven pantheons, but it also goes over, a full page of just the Faerun pantheon, just general gods for all sorts of things. And in these lists provided here, as well as in the player's handbook, they give a general Dungeons and Dragons pantheon, as well as, or I guess no, not general, they give a light Faerun, they give Greyhawk, Eberron, Dragonlance, and they give, Greek, Norse, Egyptian. So, even just in the back in the appendices of the player's handbook, you can get these lists that have the name of the deity, as well as, a title. So, you go to somewhere, Mask, God of Thieves. So it's a name and a title that kind of summarizes something. And then you get their alignment, which if you use alignment a whole lot in your game, very important. If you don't, then whatever, you don't always need that. The domains, important for clerics. What domains can the deity cover? And then a symbol, something like, what does the holy symbol of a cleric of this deity look like? You can get that same information for other pantheons in the player's handbook. Like I was saying, what is that? That's one of the appendices here at the back. Eberron, Greyhawk, Dragonlance, Forgotten Realms, Appendix B. And then they also go into Celtic, Greek, Norse, and Egyptian pantheons, and they do the same thing. Name, title, alignment, suggested domains, and symbol for all of those as well. So those are some pre-made pantheons. You can just use those. No problem. Done. Work done for you. And even if you just use the one here, if you want further details about the deities, the other books, Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide and Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes have more details on a variety of those deities. You know, a few paragraphs of who they are as, well, for lack of a better term, who they are as people. And in general, the deities are apart and you don't interact with them. However, in some previous editions, it was very keen to have stats for your deity. In the Deities and Demigods books, what is that, first? Advanced, whatever. And then third or 3.5. They had, they had books that large sections of what the books are was stats for either the deity or an avatar of the deity, something the players could really come into conflict with. They might have in some other areas then, but the one that I know of for 5th edition is in Rise of Tiamat, right at the back. Tiamat is the evil dragon deity, and they have stats for Tiamat right here in the back. Yeah. And then, of course, if you actually go through the adventure, there's rules on here's how you weaken her before the battle would begin, etc., by the whole plot. And essentially your storyline is you doing things to make it where it's easier to actually try to win at the end, because it's not an easy fight. But there are stats for one of the deities for 5th edition, and of course there's one of the ability in there that basically says when this deity is killed, they go away. They are lost for a time. Almost the idea of just planting that idea. They'll be back. I think she'd go to whatever hell she lives on. I forget what layer, and she'd end up rematerializing there. But even apart from statting out a deity, some of these older books have some good ideas. This really old one, most of it is stats for a really old system that don't really work much anymore with playing 5th edition. Fine. One thing I really like is at the very back, there is a clerical quick reference chart. And if you look at this, it goes through the different mythos, as they have here. Because this book, like I said, the ones that we had before, this one has whatever American Indian, Babylonian, Celtic, Central American, Chinese, Egyptian, Finnish, Greek, Indian, Japanese, Norse, Sumerian, has all sorts of different mythos, has different items. If you get the expensive version, it also has, like, Cthulhu mythos. I do not have that one. But anyways, like, in the back, like, even if not to use the actual information from the chart, the information that they go over, I find interesting. Because they have the name of the deity, they have sphere of control, which is more or less saying, what domain. They have an animal. Most of the deities have some sort of animal that is, like, as in, like, when you get to 3.5, you get, like, a favored weapon for the deity. This one, you had an animal that was representative with it. I really like that idea. They have little cleric boxes that say, are there male clerics, female clerics, both, non-human clerics. So yeah, like almost that idea of, only certain people could be clerics of it. That was definitely something that the older editions liked, was keeping certain certain types of characters from being certain types of things. But still. And then they have what is basically, what is the garb that the clerics would wear? Head and body, whether they would have, a knit cap, just a bare head, whether they would shave their head and be bald, whether, they wear leather helmets and ornaments, or, for body clothing, do they wear, is it kilt, or, they have golden badges, or feathered cloaks, leather vests. Sort of what is the kind of cleric garments for the priests, more or less, of this deity. They have colors, or colors. You know, basically, what kind of color scheme does the deity have within its clergy? What are you going to see? I mean, a lot of them give specific colors. Could just be saying, you know, bright colors, or, you know, they wear all black. Those things are just helping to give an idea for what the you know, if you go into a place of worship for the deity, what are the people that work, you know, that are leading that? What do they look like? They have holy days, whether full moon, new moon, equinox, whether it's the first day of spring or what's the name of it? Before any battle. You know, what are considered holy days for this deity. And then they have what is basically sacrifice, propitiation, which is how frequent and what form does it take. So this deity that is over devils has monthly human sacrifice. Okay. But this fire deity does semi-annually precious metals. Oh, you know, using that. Others, you know, have in battle they sacrifice enemy casualties. That is considered what their sacrifice is they go into battle, and basically in killing the enemies, that is the sacrifice you've made, was doing that work. This death deity, at death, valuables. The things that you have that are valuable are sacrificed at your death. This sun deity that has human hearts sacrificed annually. Central American mythos. Yeah, you know, whether gold, gems, silver coin, burnt offerings, ritual weapons, things that are either made for the deity or sacrificed to the deity, and how often they're done. Almost this idea of when do you have, what do you do, what does the actual practice of worship look like for this group? And then, along with that, what is the place of worship? A temple, a battlefield, the mountains, a temple in the forest, anywhere, aboard a ship or on the coast, in a forest, in active volcanoes or in caves, just on the hearth, something you don't really have a temple, it's just individual people have you know, little shrines on the hearth at their home. That chart is useful in that it gives great detail imaginatively without having a whole bunch of text. You can write out, and a lot of times I'll write out a paragraph on each deity to sort of give an idea of what they are, but that just gave a good idea of what worshippers of the deity would do and look like and where they would be. And that, I think, is cool. That was something that I didn't even necessarily know about until I was starting to get things together for this video, and I started looking through that book, like, is there anything I'm missing that was in this old book? Yes. Yeah, there was. Now this Deities and Demigods book here, from 3rd or 3.5, I forget, it has a number of things. It has a number of pantheons. You know, it gives actual, you know, for like Asgardian, Pharaohic, and Olympian, so Greek, Egyptian, and Norse mythologies. It gives actual like stats for the deities, as well as the D&D Pantheon, which in my current homebrew campaign that I'm running, I actually, instead of making my own list of deities, I just used the D&D Pantheon, and that was what I used for the several years that I started running games in my own worlds. I'd make my own world, but I would just use this pre-made Pantheon. It was easy to remember. It had good amount of detail in here. I'm actually still running it out of this book, And as far as the specifics, they're in the, like, I think even just the list in the back of the player's handbook. For, like, the Greyhawk deities has most of them, and then some of them are in the non-human deities chart. But you can find them there, and there we go. Deities for your own game that is already made. And this book also has information on, you know, what kind of pantheons you might make, like a loose pantheon, or tight pantheon, or monotheistic, dualism, etc., which we're about to get into the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide, and it goes over that basically as well. However, this book actually, for like some of them, has examples in the back of other religions, like where they make like a Faith of the Sun, which is a, you know, a monotheistic religion that has basically 2 aspects, but one deity, and just attributes all of the domains to one deity and all that stuff. They also have a dualistic one where there's basically, for lack of better description, I guess, like a sun and the moon, and those are the 2 deities are represented sort of by that kind of iconography of day and night, and you know, they're splitting the domains and things between 2, and the sort, of course, you know, with the other pantheons, wider pantheons, you can do it where just come up with your own aspects. What the portfolio of the deity is. And they actually have in here, in this one, they have a big list with a whole lot of things that would be important to people. That would basically, you know, need to be covered by what the different deities cover. So you can come up with all these things that are important, and then come up, you know, put them into groups however feels normal to you, and just make deities for each group. You have to have at least enough aspects to cover whatever domains you have, but of course you can have more than that. You know, you might not have a domain that specifically covers family, but domains of, you know, whether it's life or protection or whatever that may be, might be the domain that someone that focuses on a deity that focuses on family would cover. So you can do that. Or you can set them up by coming up with, you know, alignments. Like you can decide, you know, alignment is important here. I want 9 deities, 1 for each of the alignments. Or you can decide, I want 5 deities. I want, you know, 1 for chaotic, neutral, and lawful good. And then I want 1 neutral deity and then 1 evil deity. And you can, you know, cut the alignment chart that way and make your deity list. I've done that. And that works wonderfully. Come up with a few deities based on alignments. You know, make sure that each domain probably goes into at least 2 different deities, so, you know, someone's not pigeonholed and I have to have this one deity if that's the domain that I want to play. And you can just create it that way. But yeah, there's definitely some ideas here with portfolios for deities and different ways of describing deities. How do they behave and such. So this book does actually cover that, because technically this book has some information on creating your own pantheon, and it has information moreover on in the 3rd edition rules, basically players ascending to be deities. So it had information because of all of that. We of course haven't quite gotten that detail in 5th edition yet, though you could easily homebrew it if that was the campaign you wanted to run. But a lot of times I think of it more of, I like the deities as these NPCs that, depending on the way the players choose to lead things, may or be more or less involved in the story. And of course, for the most up-to-date information on deities, if you look in the Dungeon Master's Guide on like page 10, like right at the beginning of that section, it's Gods of Your World. And they give Dawn War deities, they give an example pantheon here that is different than what they had in the player's handbook. Although some of the deities are the same, but it's just sort of its own grouping of them. So there's another example if you just want to pull one of your own. but they go on to, what kind of thing, they focus mostly on a loose pantheon, which is just sort of a general grouping of gods that different people worship. And that is what most D&D settings have. And then they go with type pantheons, which it would more or less be like a worshiper would worship that group of gods. And of course you can do that as well. You can even combine it. With one of the sort of pantheons I'm thinking for a future game or something, is almost the idea that I have a creation deity, and that's the point. When coming up with deities, you can either come up with, I need deities for these players, or you can start with the deities. Let's make the deities, how did they make the world? Or did they? Was the world there and they found it? They're these great powerful beings that traveled through the cosmos and found this world and decided together, we will rule this place. Whatever it may be, you can make that mythos, starting with that, and then from there choose what are the deities like. But in my mind, almost having like a deity that is so set apart from the world that it does not even care. But it has created also a few deities below it. And each of those deities have created deities below them, and almost have it where people could either choose to worship one of these, third tier down deities that functions very much like a loose pantheon, or they can basically worship the one in the middle, that sort of second tier, and like by worshiping one of those three deities, they're basically worshiping all of the deities below them as a tight pantheon together. So you can combine them. Give your players the choice of, do they want to focus on one specific, or do they want to worship this group? They go into mystery cults, monotheism, dualism, animism, or just even forces and philosophies. The idea, maybe there really aren't gods, but you could be a worshiper of light. Basically, you could just worship the domains themselves. And then they go a little bit into how people interact with the gods. How do they worship them? And that's basically all 5th edition says to think about it, is think of what kind of pantheon you have. Which is why I spent a lot of time in the other book with being a little more detailed. Because a lot of the times, at least for me, a lot of the fun can be to add detail to them. I've had, like I said, I've had games where I just come up with, I need to fill these alignments, and I make the deities, and I write a paragraph about them, and I let the player say, hey, here's what you got to choose from. These are the ones that are ruling the place. You can not think about it all, let your players choose, if they need something. You can go into a vast detail and make a huge pantheon with all different deities, either from the side of choosing the different influences, the different aspects that are important to people's lives, and making sure that you have deities for every one of them. Or you can create a creation myth for your world and have the deities either arrive for that or created during that, and basically, have each one ruled over a different group or something as created when the world is created. And you can make your pantheon that way. There are many different ways to create a different pantheon of gods. You can even just use what you know from the real world, though. I will quote. There's actually a little sidebar I saw in this one. As you plan the mythology of your D&D campaign, think carefully about whether you want your world's religions to remind players of religions in the real world. On the one hand, players find it easier to understand religions that are similar to ones they know from the real world. However, some players find that if the religions in the game are too similar to real-life ones, it jars them out of the fantasy world they're trying to imagine. So, you can go either way. You just have to sort of make a decision. But it can be fun, especially if you have players that like to get involved with that aspect. And I do. I have at least one player that will often, fight, either whether making clerics or paladins to get involved, or whether making characters that don't necessarily have anything to do with it, but that when he finds details about religions and temples, like, he'll bite, and he'll, like, have a character that will take that into the way that he plays his character. Doing prayers, especially if you have deities, because you can have deities that are set aside and not concerned with the mortals, or you can have ones that are involved and that care, and that when someone prays, maybe something happens. And that can be fun. Now, and you say then, well, then because they don't do anything, but it all depends on how you use it. Is something happening, oh, well, smite the enemy. Then yeah, that's a lot of unaccounted for power. But if something happens is a sign, praying for which path in this cavern will lead me, to safety, and just having maybe a rock sort of dislodge and fall in one of the paths. Technically, the player doesn't know, did that rock falling mean this is a bad one, rocks fall here? Or does it mean, oh, this one, something happened, choose this one? But they feel that they've gotten an answer, and it's up to the player to interpret it. And that can be so much fun, because it's still letting them do that. And then, if you get to higher levels, you can actually go into planar travel, and at some point in the future, we'll get into, the planes of the world, but like, even in deities and demigods, they go into planar structure because the idea is the deities probably live on the outer planes. Technically, if you have vast magics, you can go travel to where they are and find them. And I've had players that have traveled to the outer planes, across them, and found the palace of Pelor, sought audience, and been granted the power to bring a loved one back from the dead. It's D&D. People are raised from the dead all the time. He just went to a god to get it to happen. And it made for an awesome story. So you don't have to include gods in any detail in your world if you don't want to. But if you choose to, you can use them. And if you know them, if you've made them, or if you've actually read up on who you want them to be, you can use them as NPCs, as characters that have influence on the story. And it can be a lot of fun to do it. If you've got any questions on implementing pantheons of deities into a world you are building, feel free to ask below. I always love comments. Gives me something to do. Otherwise, like, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. Thank you for watching, and have a good day. Bye.